Hello and welcome to Education Scotland's The Pedagogy podcast. I'm your host, Bex Ewart, and I will be leading us through some really interesting conversations around about pedagogy with a really wide and broad spectrum of educational professionals, children and young people. This podcast came about as a response to the OECD report, which found that in order to improve the quality of outcomes for our children, practitioners and teachers need to be supported to explore their own pedagogy and their practice through a pedagogical lens. Unsurprisingly, in the early years, it's been a focus, and so there's a lot of research and policy documents and research papers around about the subject of pedagogy. But as we move through the school stages and into secondary school and further education, that reference to pedagogy drops off. We'll be talking to a whole host of educational professionals from the early years through primary, young children and people from various different stages in their education, and then right into further education, exploring pedagogy, what it means to different people, and what we might change and what we might challenge ourselves around to ensure that our education meets the needs of our children and young people as we move into an exciting but unknown future. Okay, welcome everybody to this episode of Education Scotland's The Pedagogy podcast. And I'm delighted that today we're talking with Rob Houben.
Yeah, hi, welcome. Thanks for having me, Bex. Thanks for having me.
It would be brilliant if you could kind of give us a brief rundown, or not so brief, depending on where it takes us, around about how you find yourself where you are now.
Well, as you were saying, my name is Rob. I've been in education forever, never get out of it. They started paying me for it in 2000, and before that, I was like on the consumer end. I really hated that. I hated secondary school. I had a very successful primary school, which everybody thought like this boy is going to the city, and in the city they're going to see as excellent, etc., etc. And I was in the city for 3 weeks and 4 weeks, and I rang my parents and they said, "Well, it's nice that the primary school thinks he's excellent, but for us he has to go to special needs lowest level."
Wow.
Yeah, so that put my world upside down. And long story short, they discovered that I was dyslexic, and in the Netherlands, when you go to secondary, then it goes from just Dutch to German, English, French as well. And I spoke a local dialect, so I had some problems with that in the beginning, of course, all of that together. But long story short, this school really started to treat me like that outcast that we can't get out of the school, but we should get rid of him, and how can we get rid of him? And they kept on doing that for years, actually, telling me that the only thing I could do was arithmetics, and everything that has to do with reading or comprehension, just, well, Rob, why are you even bothering? That was a bit of the attitude of the school. But well, my only other option was special education, and they didn't want me because they thought I was too intelligent. So the school bunched. They had more than one fight over me, and well, you know how it goes with 12-year-old kids. They end up in the middle and they get stuck. So I really hated secondary school. They even had a meeting about if I would have a burnout within 6 months, that would mean that the special educational needs school would know what they're talking about, and that then they would also believe their long-term prediction, and that then I could stay in the normal educational system. So 6 grown-ups met and decided that the 12-year-old had to have a burnout to prove a point. So I stayed in education. I stayed in that school. I refused to go. Well, if you stay in an unhealthy environment like that for 5 to 6 years, then you believe them. Mm-hmm. So at the end, I believed that I could only do mathematics. And I saw 2 escapes. Otherwise, I would go to university, study mathematics. And for me, that felt like ending up on an addict and doing calculus all day as a job. And on the other end, it felt like, okay, but my only other escape then is to teach mathematics. But that was a big problem because I hated teachers and I hated schools. So, I didn't want to end up at that addict. So that's how I became a teacher and went to Teachers Academy. And to do it full circle, actually, the special educational needs school. That was my first job, eventually. Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't apply for that job, by the way. They gave me a rank when I was still in Teachers Academy, and they didn't know that it was that same boy from 8 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's stark, isn't it? The power that teachers' beliefs about the young people in front of them and the impact that can have.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. So I've learned very early that that it's all about the circumstances to excel, to speed the process up, to slow the process down, and of course how you influence those circumstances yourselves.
Okay, so now you are still in education, but in the delivery end of it.
Yeah.
So you were you became a maths teacher, and then what next?
Yeah, so that was my only way to get into education. That's how I felt at that point. I would love to go into primary education, but everybody told me that I would never be able to finish that Teachers Academy because, well, not enough math in there. That was their opinion, of course. So went into this school and started working there, being part of that district. And yeah, some of the principals in that district saw potential, so they started to ask me more difficult, questions which were on another level than just teaching math. And so that got me also into teacher training, into working with technology already. I remember that they wanted a new course for secondary, and that new course should be called technology, actually. And they called me in and they said, Rob, you have to be the one who's going to deliver that. So you're going to be part of that group who's designing it on a nation level and within the school. And the silly thing was, I didn't even have a computer at home at that point. So I've done that. And then later on, more and more projects like that. So helping other teachers to use more technology in the classroom, personalized education for teachers within our district. That's what I started to do. I couldn't do it with the kids yet because we were in that rigid system, it's math time, or it's not math time. And so at one point I had courses we had a district with 250 teachers, and I was delivering a course which would cost them a day a week. Well, actually 6 hours a week for 40 weeks. And 50 out of the 200 applied for that course. So that really shook our district up. Like, whoa, what's happening? The head of the district at that point was hoping that I could find 5 to 10 people.
Okay.
Yeah,
so there was a bigger demand.
Yeah. And well, from there I got into project-based learning and into personalized learning and all these P words, what people call progressive, and then you get into the debate about progressive and traditional, and then I decided I'm not going to be in the debate anymore because we need both.
Yeah.
And then at some point in 2015, the official the 4 people who grew the idea for the Agora School, one of them gave me a call and he said, well, we've started this half a year ago, but it's not going how we wanted to go, and can you come and help us next year? And that's how I ended up at Agora. And to very shortly explain what that is, at that point we were with 5 teachers, and we started a secondary school there in the Netherlands within the public system, but we weren't putting kids into classes, we weren't putting them into age groups, and we weren't delivering courses. So our timetable was you come in at 9, you leave at 3, and in between the learning happens. That was the only timetable we had. So, and we started with a simple question: what do you want to make, do, or learn? And when they would say, this is what I want to make, then we were very happy because they were definitely going to do and definitely going to learn something. And when they would say, I want to do this, then we were also happy, but we would make sure that next time they would try to make something. Because I really believe that if you make or create something or host an event or whatever, that's what sticks for life. And with that, all the learning sticks with you as well. The problem there was that we were working very hard as teachers in the regular system, but we weren't able to properly write down and share what we were doing. And on the other end, at some point, we had over 60 visitors on a weekly basis, or 60 visit requests on a weekly basis. And we definitely couldn't handle that. And so when the school grew, I became the head of the team lead of Agora. And yeah, and from there I decided, like, okay, now the school is this big. When I quit that job, there were over 40 employees. So for me, that was the moment that it turned into hotel management instead of educational lead. So, well, and I didn't want to be an hotel manager for the rest of my life. So I started my company, alllearners.org, to, first of all, to really write down what is the core that you need to have in place for any school who wants to improve. You don't have to become an Agora. And second, to share all of that with a lot of schools around the world. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm still working a bit for Agora, but I also work for Green School in South Africa. I work for schools in Costa Rica. I work for two schools in Scotland, which you visited before. I work for a school in Oslo. I visit schools all around the world. This summer, probably Australia, a lot of schools. So yeah, it's really nice to be able to finally write down what we're doing in a very positive way, which changes the language. And that's most important to me. Change the language in which we use to talk about education.
Wow, there's an awful lot in there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's brilliant. One of the things that I'd like to kind of understand a bit more is it was a secondary school and your timetable was 9 till 3. Because you were working within the state system, I guess you still had the same kind of accountability pressures and the same qualification expectations for your children and young people. So how does that work?
Well, that works very well, actually, because what in the Netherlands, what a lot of schools don't know or don't use is the fact that the government doesn't tell you what you need to do by the hour. The government tells you what you need to deliver at the end.
Yeah.
And what then happened is that school districts, with their parent-student body, started making agreements, extra rules on this is our lesson table, this is our daily structure, these are the books that we use. And what they did is they made a lot of rules on them. But that's the problem of your district in the Netherlands, of your, even you can do that on a school level. So you can also change these rules on the school level. And that's what we did. The only thing, when you look at Dutch law, for instance, the only course that you are obliged to do for a certain amount of hours on a weekly basis is physical education. That's the only one. All the other ones, there is no law that tells you that you have to have a certain amount of hours of mathematics or that you have to use this book. But what they tell us by law is what we need to deliver every 3 years or every 2 years. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. That means that you can start with the motivation of a child instead of start with what we feel has to be the goal. And that's what we started doing at Agora. We were just looking at, okay, and in my system, I have an analogy for that. I call it the window of opportunity. There is a window of opportunity to learn something. And you don't have to start with everybody at the same moment, but you need to end at the same time. And in the Netherlands, that is before state exams.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. So, and the stupid thing, Bex, is that every parent knows this. Because, so for instance, in the Netherlands, everybody rides the bike. I never seen any parent which his daughter came up to and would say, Daddy, I want to ride the bike. That daddy would say, wait, I have to find 25 other kids. We're going to put them in a row and we're going to explain them how to ride the bike together. We don't do that. When your daughter wants to ride the bike start riding the bike at the age of 3, you facilitate that. And when another one would ask you at age 3.5, you're not telling him you're behind, you just facilitated them. And that's how we should, in my opinion, educate. Because what I've noticed is, and this is a practical example I use a lot, I only had to run with my daughter for 3 days in a row for 15 minutes to get her to ride the bike. And it wasn't getting her to ride the bike. It was more that she was getting me to run with her And I had this guy in my neighborhood, and he forced it upon his son, and he ran for 3 weeks, every day 15 minutes. And the end result was that his son hated biking. So I'm seeing the same with kids who need to start reading. They hate it. You've planned to start it at the wrong moment. So these kids hate reading. If you wait and facilitate that they really want to learn how to read, then they can, I see them making big jumps and going forward. And there is no difference between my daughter, now she's 12, and my neighbor's son, who's 13. They can ride the bike. Nobody's seeing that they started later. They are in the same level. So we should use that in education, and we don't. Everywhere else we do it. If you go for your driver's license, they will not say to you, it's going to be 25 lessons, Bex. That's not what they say. They say, I want to see you for like 5 lessons, and then I can make a judgment.
Yep.
So even they know. the driver instructor knows. And education we don't, or we don't use it.
There's great. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of percolating. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
no, it's brilliant. It's really exciting. And obviously, it's because my background is primary and early years. In terms of that flexibility, it's easier to conceptualize.
Yeah.
And then we kind of come into the secondary system, and I'm just thinking of my son's experience, and that's
No, well, the problem is that I see it done in kindergartens. I see it done there very well. But what we do is we don't build on that, because it diverts. We all start looking at what's the end goal. How are universities doing? And how do we get them to that point? And then we start focusing on knowledge, and then we start focusing on knowledge transfer, and then we're forgetting what the actual pedagogy should be.
Which leads nicely on to then, what does the term pedagogy mean to you?
Yeah, well, I've listened to one of your podcasts, and I heard you asking that question. So I thought, let's look it up. And I Googled it. Yeah, so I Googled it, and the first thing that came up in Google is pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject of theoretical concepts. You see, there we go already. We're focusing on academics.
Yeah.
And we're talking about teaching. Well, I try to avoid that word as much as possible because it's very close to preaching. Yeah. And by the way, nothing is wrong with preaching every now and then. It should be part of the job of an educator. But when you start preaching, you must really know for sure that your audience wants to listen to what you have to say. And I caught myself as a math teacher in a lot of times that they definitely weren't ready to listen to what I had to preach, because my book told me it's page 48, you're going to explain Pythagoras, and it is November 16, so you have to do it today. I don't care what the kids are thinking. It's page 39, you know. So for me, we need to protect that part of education. It has to stay in there. Preaching is very valuable, but we shouldn't start with just preaching. We need to know where these kids are, and we need to connect it to them. So when I think about it, pedagogy for me is more a way to influence the learning circumstances for students. And students, what I'm talking about, my company is called All Learners, because All Learners for me stands for everybody who wants to learn for a lifetime. And teachers should also be learners. So it's also something that managers should facilitate. Met a lot of principals who told me my teachers don't want to learn, and I asked these managers, okay, what are their interests? And the manager said, no, they're refusing my courses. Well, that's something totally different. So for me, pedagogy it's about the way we can help each other with each other's self-development. For me, that's pedagogy. And self-development starts at birth. Everybody is already ready to self-develop, and we educators are just along for a tiny bit of the ride. And that's almost nothing if you compare it to a lifetime of self-development. The time that we have with these kids, it's so we need to adjust to the process that is already going on. And then there is a simple question to be asked: how can I amplify the learner's self-development? And immediately after that, we should ask, how can we teach them to do that together? because we're only there for a short period. So they have to learn how to do that together with other people. And of course, self-development sounds very personal, but it isn't, because learning is a very social activity.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for me, that's the pedagogy. The pedagogy is about influencing the learning circumstances and helping people to be great self-developers, and knowing that they have to do that with other people.
There seems inside of that quite a radical shift in terms of what the role of the teacher is there. So like you talked about, instead of it being kind of a delivery of a course, the kind of knowledge transfer, there's a lot more partnership and exploration and uncertainty around about that. So if you're sitting in a school, for example, a high school typically has about 1,000 students maybe in Scotland. Mm-hmm. That's huge, and there are 1,000 different individuals there with 1,000 different motivations and interests and strengths and stages. So how can you manage that, and in a way that is deliverable with the resources that you have, rather than kind of 1,000 other adults to facilitate?
Yeah, so the nice thing about 1,000 people, I think a lot of people recognize that when they went to secondary school or to university or to high school, they finally found that group of friends that they really couldn't find in their own small town, because there was only one friend who was thinking alike. When you get part of a bigger system, then you find a group of people who's like-minded. So it's not that difficult within a group of 1,000 people to find 15 to 20 people who want to study the same. That's already there, but we're not organizing it. We're organizing the opposite. We're putting them into age groups, we're putting them into levels. So, and with that, we prevent groups who are motivated to learn the same thing to connect with each other, because they're all in different classes. They're scattered out through the building. So we have a back-end problem. I've built a toolkit which I help schools with, and this toolkit has 3 columns. And the first column is we have to deliver an experience, and we need to start from there. What we've done traditionally in education is we have to deliver goals, and we need to start from there. So what do we do then? Then we group goals instead of people who want to learn the same thing. We put goals together in a group. We have these goals in a group. That means that we can have a lesson. That means that we need 30 people of an audience with that teacher to do that. So any other company in the world works the other way around. They look at who are my clients, what do I need to facilitate with them, how do I make them happy, and how do I make them achieve those goals. That's the other way around, and education works. That's why education can tell you, well, your son doesn't fit in here.
Yeah.
They don't tell you that in Disneyland at the entrance.
True enough.
And the library doesn't tell you that as well when you enter. They say, everybody's welcome. Come on, let's find you a book. So everyone else is doing it the other way up, the other way around. Every football club tells you you're welcome. Come on, let's see if you can find a match here.
Yeah.
So we're doing it everywhere. We can do this, but we have to organize our core in a different way. And the people are there. So if you have 1,000 people, you can learn a lot, because there's a lot to learn when you have 1,000 people.
So what you're talking about and the way that you're describing it seems so dramatically different to what we have at the moment, that conceptually it's hard to imagine how you would get from where we are now to what you describe.
Yeah, and that's why I'm helping these schools, and that's why I get invited in a lot of countries, because it's not that hard actually. It's getting rid of some parts of the structure, and so in education we have a structure that's very visible at the front end. Mm-hmm. You get your timetable before summer, yeah. And you know, so that's very visible structure, and that gives people a lot of security, because they already see the structure. That the kids then don't connect with the lessons. Oh yeah, well, we at least have the structure, you know. But what I've started doing in multiple schools is starting to collaborate with 3 or 4 teachers at the same time. Instead of putting these kids into 4 rooms far away from each other, having 3, 4 teachers together, collaborating with a bigger group of people. Making these 4 teachers responsible for what are we doing with these kids in the upcoming 4 hours, instead of what am I doing with my group in the first hour, with my group in the second hour, with my group in the third hour. So if you can arrange a group of teachers and their groups of children to be in one place for half a day, they will approach, you give them the freedom to approach it totally different.
Mm-hmm.
If I've done back in 2010 in the school where I was working, I was the mathematics teacher and a colleague of mine was the Dutch teacher. And before we both of us were in these rooms separately. And we asked the school, can we use the atrium, the main atrium of the school, for when we have mathematics and Dutch, because we're not using them. We're only using them during lunchtime. So can we use that for our lessons? And they said, yes, of course. And then we came there together in that room. And what we saw was that kids who are good at Dutch aren't that good at mathematics. And kids who were good at mathematics often aren't that good at language. So we could balance that out. We could say to the kids who needed more mathematics, go to Rob. And we needed more Dutch, go to Rico, to my coworker. We weren't forcing them to study 45 minutes of Dutch and then 45 minutes of mathematics. We're giving them the opportunity to study 15 minutes of Dutch and an hour and 15 on mathematics. So you can start this from a traditional school. But it is about collaboration, and it is about admitting that you as a teacher don't have to know everything, but you're part of a constellation who can know everything.
I like that, being part of a constellation. That's a lovely image.
It is. Yeah. Imagine how big our constellation is. How many parents do these kids have? They want to contribute. I've seen it in every school where I go to. I ask parents, do you want to contribute? And they say, yes, but my son isn't always listening. And I tell these parents, that's no problem. This son wants to listen to you. So come on in.
One of the key themes that has come out across most, if not all, of the conversations that I've had is around about trust and about how any development in pedagogy requires individuals, teachers, educators to trust themselves. It requires the system leaders to trust the individual practitioners, but it also requires the adults in the space to trust the children and young people, because one of the kind of pushbacks I would imagine to the approach that you're talking about is, great, that works for the kid who is motivated, that works for the young person who is responsible and can take forwards their own learning, but if I am not making sure that all of the children in front of me study this thing, then how will I make sure that they get what they need?
Yeah. So first of all, it's very interesting, or I like it that you thought about motivation, because if somebody's not motivated, the best result that I can deliver as a teacher is that he still remembers it at the test. Well, that sucks, because we're educating them for life, not for the test. So that would be the best result. Most of the times with kids who aren't motivated, we don't even achieve that, and then we blame the kid. So this is actually where we need to start. If the student is not motivated, that if I say my student isn't motivated, that tells a lot about me. That means that I don't know what the hook is on which I can connect the learning. That even means that the student doesn't even know it yet. Well, why are we dropping information on him then? To feel miserable, to make him feel miserable? Because that's the effect. That's the effect. What this is, what you're talking about at the moment, and what a lot of teachers are blaming students for, is that they don't respond to extrinsic motivation. Well, they shouldn't. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. I think it was part of the self-determination theory, where they say that you have like extrinsic motivation, you could put that into two groups. Controlled motivation, which is like the feeling that I must do this. Well, if you do that a lot with people, they end up in a burnout. And autonomous motivation, the feeling that I want to do this. Well, if we believe we are good educators and we can't even put kids in the position that they want something, what are we doing? So the only thing what we are doing is then achieving our own goals. I prepared them well for the test. And then they score bad and we can say you weren't motivated. Well, that sucks. 60 years ago or 70 years ago, there weren't that many goals in education as there are at the moment. So what are we doing? We're adding on goals, adding on goals, adding on goals, adding on goals. This forces teachers to start with all these goals. This forces teachers to check all these boxes. And they don't check them with the kids anymore. They check them in the timetable. So before the kids even come in, they have a timetable so they can check all the boxes. And that's proof that the teacher done a good job. But if he really has done a good job, he should lower the amount of goals and say these goals are goals that these students actually going to remember for a lifetime instead of just for the test. And up until now, in the Netherlands, everybody's happy when you score 6 out of 10. So that means 30 to 40% of the knowledge is not there. Well, why not then get rid of 30% of the goals and start with things that really kids really want to remember for a lifetime and really need for a lifetime and are really motivated for. And then we start there, and then you will see that they start from motivation. And what I've seen in the schools I've worked is if you really start from motivation, they want to know the extra 30% as well. But if you do it the opposite way, you start with the 30% that they don't want to know, where they're not connecting on. They don't want to know a big part of the 60% as well. The figures that I'm throwing at you are at random. You know, I don't know if it's really 30 or 60%, but it's as an illustration of what I'm talking about.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I can kind of, I'm thinking generally teachers and educators are exhausted across all systems that I'm kind of talking about and talking with. And it seems like the shift to what you're talking about could feel too big, but then I guess it's you're working and you can actually see something happening rather than feeling like it's that same old grind and Groundhog Day with the same rubbish outcomes for everyone.
You see there is a strange system, and that's really also a problem on a management level and on a district level. We are really managing education in a way that we want to see outcomes, and they have to fit into an Excel spreadsheet. Well, if that's what your boss asks from you, then the teachers are going to develop Excel spreadsheets. Then they're going to put these kids into these small into these small cells. But that's not how education really should work. That's not how people educate themselves in the evening, you know? If we look at grown-ups, I don't know a lot of people who go back to school at 32. But I still know a lot of people who turn on YouTube to learn stuff and then do it the day after. So we really need to have a good look at what learning actually is. Because we well, you know, the whole Ken Robinson talk, we industrialized it. And we're still keeping that at our core. But this started like 150, 200 years ago. And we have so much more scientific insights in where motivation comes from, how learning actually happens, how you can learn from a lifetime instead of just remember for a lifetime instead of just for a test. But because we keep that core in education there and that control fever, I would almost say. But actually, I shouldn't complain too much about the Scottish system. I think what you've done with your curriculum of excellence is great. But now we have to, the districts really need to allow schools and allow teachers to do it in a different way. And I think a lot of people need to be honest, and they need to say, I don't know how we need to do this or how we can do this. They have to be honest about that. But if you don't know how to do it, that's not a reason not to start.
That's a really good point. And I think you're right. I think the Curriculum for Excellence is really a fantastic document, and it's really permissive. And so is the rest of the policy landscape. But that hasn't maybe been presented with the kinds of support that folk need to move away from the idea of the kind of sage on the stage and delivery of curriculum, because our curriculum is designed not to be delivered, but to be constructed.
Yeah, exactly.
But then we still have the kind of accountability thing with the exams and the outcome measures that you talk about.
Yeah, of course, but Bex, there is nothing wrong with some exams.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong, what I believe that what we do wrong in education is giving this kids tests while knowing that they're not ready for it. That's wrong. You know, if I ask you to jump over a 2-meter high wall, well, Bex, you're gonna fail. So why should I ask you that? If I'm training with you and I see that you can do it, that's the moment I should ask. So I don't feel there is something wrong with exams. It's what's wrong is what we do before that, is that all that testing and moments while we know that, because we look over children's shoulders on a daily basis, we know that they're going to fail tomorrow, and we still put the exam in front of them. Well, that sucks.
Yeah.
That's also something your driver instructor won't do. He will not send you to the exam if he doesn't have the feeling that you're totally ready for it.
Yep. And I think one of the things that's been kind of percolating while we've been talking is that what we're talking about doesn't necessitate a lack of rigor or a lack of really robust information about the children and young people in front of us. And in fact, it's almost predicated on it. You must have that deep knowledge of the learners in front of you and be able to demonstrate that for you to be able to meet their needs, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, so this what you're talking about now relates a lot with what I got from Vygotsky's proximal development zone. Mm-hmm. You know, for me, that I consider that as like the stretch zone, a zone where somebody wants to stretch into. It's not his panic zone, it's not his comfort zone, it's the place where he really wants to learn something. Well, if we or the student doesn't know where that zone is, we should first find it, because otherwise what we're doing is useless.
Yeah.
You know, if you are 6 or 7 and you don't want to learn how to tell time and you need my help, I'm going to answer, I have time for you at 11:15, and then you're not showing up. And then I'll go to you and I say, come on, we'll have a look at my table. This is everything I prepared for you, but you're too late now. So go, I can see you at 12:15. Well, if I do that two, 3 times a day and I give the parents an honest phone call, I'm teasing your son today. The day after that, he will ask me, can you please explain to me how to tell time? So we can, it's not like I'm not promoting that we constantly following what kids want. What we are in the lead of their education, but we should make sure that their motivation is there before we actually start educating. And you can do that in many ways, can influence that in many ways.
So you mentioned there that Vygotsky is kind of part of the background of your thinking. So what other thinking has inspired you around pedagogy?
Yeah, well, the Ryan and Daisy self-determination theory, that's the most inspiring for me. So it describes the basic psychological needs in motivation, development, and wellness. So, well, that's it for me. That's learning, that's education, that's personal development, and everything at once. So, and for me, that is the foundation of personal development. And that's what we're actually doing in education, helping people with their personal development. So it's helping people to get a grip on their thoughts, on their emotions, on their behavior. And because they get a grip on that, they are able to learn, and they can be that sponge who sucks up knowledge, who sucks up skills, who's social for other people because he knows that he can't learn on his own or can't go further on his own. So for me, it's all about that. So what I would say to teachers is constantly, you need to assess what is the autonomy level, the related level, and the competence level of your student. And as soon as you see that, then you can go to Vygotsky and see, okay, and which of these 3 can I stretch? Is this student open to stretch his autonomy? Is he open to stretch his relatedness with other people, or to stretch his competence? And it doesn't matter which one he's open for. As soon as you start doing that, the other two will follow. That's what I see in practice. So that's that's how I look at education.
I don't know if you're aware, in Scotland at the moment, there's quite a big debate nationally around about behaviour in schools and the kind of dysregulated behaviours that we see.
Yeah. Yeah. A former principal where I worked with, he would always say, Rob, if you put rats in a box, they will fight. And if you would put students in a small box, they will fight as well. They will fight you and they will fight each other. So yeah. So I'm thinking what I'm seeing in most schools is that we are creating the circumstances for that ourselves. So for instance, if you look up pictures of our Agora school, that is a very different looking school. It has bright colors. There are lots of things on the walls. You get a stunt on every corner you turn around. There is something is hanging there. Something unexpected is standing there. So a lot of people would say, like, this is no environment for autistic people. They need these really no distractions at all. And these people were saying that while they were in our building, not knowing that 40% of our students at that point were special educational needs students. So, but it's the culture that you create together, it's the community that you create together, and it's also the freedom that you create together. You know, and I've seen it myself with I've told you a little bit about my history. So I had this. We were sitting in regular classrooms, and every day there would be somebody from the extra staff getting me out of the classroom. You know, either a principal because he wanted to talk to me, either someone else. Well, that's great because the rest of the class now knows who to pick on. That's what we facilitate in schools. But if we're talking about these learning environments which we are creating, which work differently, then there is nobody who gets out of the classroom. Everybody connects with a lot of people. So the whole atmosphere changes. And so what I'm seeing in education is that teachers still feel like that they have to act like they know everything. But these students at home have the materials to get perspectives from people all around the world on that same topic. So they hear that their teacher doesn't know everything. So I think that's also part of the fight. Like, why am I learning this? Somebody else, I can get this information in different ways. The students now see all these options. And what we shouldn't forget is that at students in this age, the amount of knowledge that comes towards them on a daily basis, not just by school, but also all the information that comes towards them. Wow, it's way more than if you would be 10 in 1950.
Yep.
So what are these students doing? There is so much information thrown at them when they walk on the street, when they sit at home, when they look at the television. Well, all kids don't look at television anymore. They're on their computers, they're on their phones. And they have to handle all that information. So what are they constantly doing? Swiping. I don't want to remember this. I want to remember that. I want to remember this. I don't want to remember that. Well, they're doing the same thing at school. And then the teacher is telling them that they have to listen. Well, if that's going to be conflict.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, what you say resonates really deeply with me, and it makes a lot of sense more broadly.
So we're actually not helping them to handle all that information. We're giving them more information that they don't want to hear. We should be doing the opposite. We should be helping them to handle all the information that's already coming at them, look what their passion is, and then from there start adding on information that they actually is in their stretch zone at that moment. And then we, of course, can stretch them into zones that they actually also need to learn from our perspective.
Yeah.
But we first need to help them handle all that.
It makes a lot of sense. And again, one of the key themes that keeps coming through in these conversations is that we have a kind of narrow rectangle of what we perceive to be the education system.
Yeah.
And, you know, great for if it works for you, fantastic. And most probably if it works for you, you then go back into the system because it's a good system and it worked. So it's kind of broadening that, isn't it?
Yeah, and what I want to make very clear is there is no element in education that we immediately should stop using. Every element in education is useful, but we're often using it in the wrong sequence, or in the wrong order, or with the wrong group of children. But there is nothing in education, there is no teacher that we can't use in the future. They all have skills that we definitely need. There is no, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, that we can do without this great history teacher who can talk in very amusing about history. He should keep on doing that. But we should make sure that we get kids in the room who actually want to hear it.
So from that, I'm a secondary school teacher listening to this, or I'm a systems leader. What's the kind of key message that you think I need to hear? What do I need to take away from this conversation and start to think about more?
First of all, you are along for the ride. You are not the right. You're along for the ride. Yeah. So I think that's very important. It's their self-development. It's their right. It's not ours. And we are alone. So, and then maybe, as I was saying, my website, alllearners.org, the all stands for A Lifelong Learners Organization. So stop thinking about it as a school. We are lifelong learners organizations. That means that we need to keep on developing, and we need to help students to keep on developing. That's our main goal, in my opinion. So we have to be very honest about what we don't know. And we have to open up the doors for other teachers and even people from outside our schools to help us with what we don't know, or what we aren't really an expert at. You know, if you work with 15-year-olds, they are looking at their futures. What do you want to become? Well, I can tell them about what a baker does, or we can let them bake a cake with a baker, and then they know if they want to become a baker. So we should open the doors for that, because we need to prepare them for their future, not for ours. So be honest about what you can't. You know, I hate those positions in schools that we are creating, and where these people, they are like student counselors to look to their future, and they act like they know everything about every job. And what are they doing? They're inviting kids into an office and telling them about what a baker does. It sucks. And if kids are actually able to start baking cake, they are doing mathematics. They're doing a lot of things that we actually need. It's chemistry. So connect to that. So collaborate more. And then to be more specific, if you're going to teach tomorrow, start looking at how are they growing instead of how can I grade them. For me, play is where education starts. And if you don't want to use the word play with the 15-year-olds, tell them that they should experiment and research, because that's exactly the same. And I think a lot of people at the age of 45 who are working somewhere, they have in their job a part of their day where they are experimenting and researching. So everybody is still playing. We shouldn't put that in a small box for 5-year-olds. And when your students are playing, when you see them playing with what you've offered them in the learning environment, you have to be intentional. When you see that there is a possibility that you can lure them into learning, do it. And be specific, give them proper feedback. And of course, as I was saying earlier, self-development is not something you do solo. And that's very important. It has to stay a social activity. I think, looking back at this talk, I think that's my way of summarizing it.
Yeah, that is a a comprehensive summary, I'd reckon. And also, I agree with your point there around about play. It's one of the conversations that I've been having with my colleagues recently, because in Scotland there is obviously a push for play pedagogy, but the word play, I think, then gets caught up in a whole host of cultural assumptions and historical kind of, it's just heavy with unexamined kind of.
Yeah, so I use it the other way around now. I tell the people, we have to make sure that you can experiment and research. And then even professors start nodding, because that's what they do. They recognize that. And then I say, AKA play.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, it's that developmental thing, isn't it? Because when you're younger, you have to be able to play with concrete resources. Yeah. And as you develop, then you can start to play with ideas. But it's the same kind of novel combinations, turning them upside down.
Yeah. And what we were talking about, if you want to lure kids into stuff or students into stuff, you have to have a very rich learning environment in which they come in and immediately start touching things or experimenting with stuff.
Super. Well, that's fine. We can totally transform the education system tomorrow. There's no problem.
Definitely. But we need to make sure, listen, sorry that I'm saying this, but we don't have to transfer the whole system at once. We have people who are great at what they're doing at the moment. We have kids who really want that. We have parents who really want that. So please respect the learning curve of these people as well.
Yeah.
But there are also people who want to approach it from a different way and who want to send their kids to that different school. Well, why not start these schools as well next to what we have? And then we grow into it. Because we need to grow into this. We can't. The biggest problem I'm seeing in a lot of districts and countries and schools as well is that they believe that they have to do it immediately for everybody. And because they can't see how to do that, then they don't do it. And that's ridiculous. That's not how transformation works. You know, when we invented, we didn't, but when people invented the car, the horse wagon was still there.
Yeah.
You know? And I still, every now and then in my local community, see somebody with a horse and a wagon because it's fun. So it can be a slow process, but you need to allow people to ride cars as well.
Yeah.
You shouldn't ban cars because everybody has a horse wagon at the moment.
Okay, so what's next for you, Rob?
Yeah, well, I'm doing a lot of what I'm actually talking about at the moment because I hate these people who give lectures about stuff that they don't do and they don't know how to do it. So I'm slowly getting out of the Agora schools. Officially, this is my last school year that I'm officially connected to the Agora schools. Yeah, we've decided that it was a process. So the last 2 years I've spent on stepping back from management, setting up the new management for success, and with my company starting to come up with the building block system, which they can, so they actually know, well, this is the core of our school, this is where we can continue building on. And I've done it in a way that it's not just for Agora, but it is usable in any school. And that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. So I'm visiting a lot of schools around the world who want to make a step. They don't necessarily have to change everything. But with the building block system, I'm giving them the language and the backbone, because with every building block, I have the research material, not my research material, but of the official scientists who done it. And it's giving them the language. It gives them simple examples, like the riding the bike example, stuff like that. So it's giving them the language to talk about the change with children, with parents, with co-workers, and from there develop how do we want to do this tomorrow. And that's what I'm doing with schools, and as I was saying, all over the world. So that's very interesting. And then I can connect these different schools as well. You know, if somebody developed something, then I can share that within these schools as well, and I can connect the people when they are both interested in the same thing. And yeah, so that's where I'm going at the moment. And of course, I'm doing keynotes and lectures when I got asked as well. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and so I know we were chatting just before we started recording that your two songs have been one of the most thought-provoking things.
Yeah, well, the thing was, you asked me to, when you invited me for this, you asked me to come up with 2 songs, which I was like, I will not be able to do that. But for some reason, then you hear a song, and then it connects. Like, hey, I could use this, and I could use that. So I have 2 songs for you. One is "You Can't Teach an Old Dog New Tricks" by C6 Steve.
I love C6 Steve.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And the other one is "School's Out" by Alice Cooper.
Okay.
And I want to explain why. I would love to explain why, because I first of all, I like both songs and I like the artists as well, but I never totally analyzed the lyrics. But because you asked me, I started analyzing the lyrics, and so I want to get into that because the C6 Steve thing, I've seen C6 Steve performing live years ago already, and that was when he was just like globally discovered. And he was playing guitar, but it wasn't a guitar, it was a cigarette box where he was playing on. He made guitars out of cigarette boxes. So the lesson for me there is, to have high-end outcomes, you don't have to have the same approach. You know, he has great high-end outcomes when it comes. I love his music, and it sounds like a guitar, but it isn't. So allow people to approach it from a different perspective and give them the chance to prove that they can have the same high-end outcomes. That's what I'm in general. That's why I was looking for C6 Steve song. And then I got this "You Can't Teach an Old Dog New Tricks," because the first part of the lyrics is there must be something wrong with me. What is it that I can't see? I can't seem to do nothing right. So that's a feeling that a lot of people in education actually have, not only the students, by the way. And then I started the School's Out by Alice Cooper, and the first 2 lines there are, we got no choice, all the girls and boys make all that noise. That's what we're actually been talking about. Because they found new toys. They actually found new toys. There are new toys to get knowledge. So that was very interesting to me as well. And further down the line, it says, "I'm bored to pieces." Well, I hear that a lot from students as well. So for me, School's Out, it's not just for summer, because I see a lot of schools who already turned off and they are in the building. Yeah. So we have something to do. And that swerves back to the motivational thing that we were talking about earlier. And to swerve back to that C6 Steve song, so that continues like, maybe I need to change my style. Been this way for a long, long while. Maybe there is a few things I ought to fix. Well, when I was reading that, that's definitely not just about students. It's about the teachers. It's about education in general. And Alice Cooper sings then about the no choice. So we should at least create some choice, because what C6 Steve is saying, we can't teach an old dog new tricks. So maybe some of the old dogs, we have to allow them to stay old dogs. And I don't mean that negative, because, well, there is a market for that. And maybe they change later on, but we shouldn't be forcing them to change. Because as C6 Steve is singing, they've been like that for a long, long while. But we have to build something next to our system, in my opinion, and give that the freedom to be successful. And for that, you have to give them time as well. But as I was saying, we need these old dogs and we need these new dogs, and these new dogs can already start. And what I've seen is that some old dogs then leap over to the new dogs. And as I was saying, there is nothing wrong with any element of education. So at the end, we can use all the old dogs as well. So that wouldn't be a problem. But we have to treat them with respect. You know, an old dog needs a lot of respect, in my opinion. And by the way, I'm not talking about age. With old, I'm talking about people who are really stuck into the educational system, became a teacher because they loved to the role that they saw in front of them last year. Mm-hmm. You know? Mm-hmm. Because we shouldn't forget that there is no bigger commercial for an occupation than for teaching. You're looking at one from age of 4 up until you're 18. So,
absolutely. Thank you, Rob. That's been a really really interesting, thought-provoking conversation for me, and hopefully it'll spark some thinking for other folk too.
Yeah, thanks, Bex.
Talking with Rob was so inspirational and really exciting to dig down to the sorts of actual and real constraints that the education system sits within. So for me, the idea that actually legally, what are the hufties that are written down in law? So for him in the Netherlands, it was about that couple of hours of PE, but actually that's the only thing that is codified about what you must do day to day. So then that freedom, as soon as you think that way, to be able to create a place where children and young people are supported to lead their own learning and to develop, it's really exciting. The other thing for me, though, that really stood out is that with that shift and with that development, that doesn't mean that the way that we've done education so far around about the teachers holding the knowledge and being able to support and develop knowledge in young people needs to change. There's still definitely a place for that kind of didactic teaching where there's just a simple thing about you need to know this before you can then combine it with everything else you know, so that it's a development and an expansion rather than a change and, if you like, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The other thing that struck me when I was talking with Rob is how deeply our own personal experiences shape our professional identities. So he's so motivated to be able to think about how to expand and develop the way that education can be delivered or supported because of the ways, his experiences that were not positive for him as a learner when he was in secondary school. But having that drive and knowing that actually there's a different way that this can be done in order to meet the needs of everybody. So we're just widening the access, I guess, and widening the parameters for success and the parameters to be successful. Throughout these conversations, the social nature of learning keeps coming up, and that connectedness keeps coming up, along with motivation. I really liked his idea that, if a kid can't tell the time, it's not going to really stick until they have a motivation for learning that way. And so again, that's where our own professional judgment comes in. We can go, right, come back and I'll talk to you at noon. And then if they miss that, then they suddenly have a reason why they're going to put that effort in, and they can see that value and see how it helps them. The three things that he talks about in terms of autonomy, relatedness, and competence, they're great little ideas to think about the different hooks that you can start to get into that space where you can inspire curiosity and support that exploration across knowledge. And again, across these conversations, the idea of collaboration and the idea of building on each other's strengths come through. I love the visual idea of being part of a constellation of collaboration, and it really makes the value of each of the different ways that we are as teachers come together, and how you can coordinate and work together to make the most of that. One of the key things that came through, I was just reading the OECD Improving Schools in Scotland, and one of the things that they say there is whether more or less traditional, direct teaching or student-centred, it will need to be collaborative with teaching done in teams. So that idea that we're moving away from having our own little silos and our own classrooms, but even where we're giving traditional didactic teaching, it's in collaboration and it's contextual and it works for the young people in front of us. I was thinking the whole time, I wish I could just up sticks and move my family across to the Netherlands, because I think my son would really benefit from that freedom and trust in that kind of way of doing things. And my son attends a phenomenal school, no bad things against his school at all, but just that excitement about how you can develop when you have that space and freedom and trust that actually we know that you want to learn. You might be brilliant at maths, so brilliant you have a couple of sessions there to just get on top of that particular concept. but you can come and spend way more time over here in languages, because that's where you need that time, that's where you need that input. And the capacity for that to then be so student-centred and give our children the best chance of success. So really lovely. I like the idea that play is where education starts, and it's that experimentation and that intentionality, and really excited to think about what that could mean for schools in Scotland. Actually, if we look at our the things that we must do, if we look about the absolute immovables, we probably do have the same amount of freedom, and we are able to still meet those needs of the external assessments, but through a way that might be quite transformational to the students and to the teachers. It must be quite an exciting thing to be part of a space like that. I'd really love to hear what you think about what you've heard. Please do use the Twitter hashtag #ESPedagogy podcast and get in touch. Talk to us about what you think. Think about what it might mean in terms of your practice. What are the absolute non-negotiables, and what are the things that you could experiment with? Exciting times. Thanks for listening. Cheery bye.